Chris Wallace joins CNN Plus and the dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer. Welcome, everybody, to Mark and the Millennials. Again, this podcast is called Chris Wallace Joins CNN Plus. The plus is for pedophiles for CNN, because that's going to be their new streaming service, because they've had so many people who've gotten in trouble there and continue to get in trouble because they are involved in all kinds of sex crimes, including the most recent, one of the producers, they're arrested for pedophilia. It's almost too hard to believe, but that hasn't stopped Chris Wallace. He's going to join them anyway. So in the Daily Caller, Chris Wallace announces departure from Fox News and he will go to CNN. Chris Wallace announced his departure. After 18 years, this is my final Fox News Sunday, Wallace said at the end of his show. It is the last time, and I say this with real sadness, we will meet like this. Not sure what that means, actually. Quote, we are extremely proud of our journalism and the stellar team that Chris Wallace was a part of for 18 years, Fox News Media said in a statement. The legacy of Fox News Sunday will continue with our star journalists, many of whom will rotate in the position until a permanent host is named, said Fox News. Wallace mentioned that he had been fortunate enough to cover presidential elections and interview every president since George H.W. Bush. He also became the first Fox News journalist to moderate a presidential debate during the 2016 general election, according to Fox News. Wallace had been in the broadcasting industry for over 50 years, according to Fox News. He won many broadcast news awards, including three enemas. Yeah, there you go. The Paul White Award for Lifetime Achievement and Service to Electronic Journalism. Just to say this, with Fox News and with Chris Wallace won all of those awards because he was on the right side of the political spectrum, namely that he was a liberal. Obviously, if you ever heard him interview people, I mean, they say he's a hard-charging journalist. In what lifetime did you see that? So Wallace will be joining CNN's new streaming service, CNN Plus, for its launch in 2022, CNN announced. Because as you all know out there in podcast land, things are moving quickly away from cable TV, that forced video that you've got to buy from the cable TV companies, that forced package where you spend this ton of money and give it to cable TV so that you can watch maybe one channel or two channels, and they give you 150 or 250 channels or even more. And most of the channels are garbage. And people are moving to streaming because that way you can actually buy what you want and see what you want when you want, as opposed to cable TV, which of course is a dying service. The only thing that cable TV has left really is to sell you broadband service, and then you just switch to the streaming services. And of course you have HBO Plus, I think, HBO streaming. You have Disney streaming. Obviously you have Netflix and Amazon. You have Sling TV, of course, which allows you to see it anywhere you want to, anything that you want, anywhere. YouTube TV. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on and on. So CNN's like, oh, we're going to start CNN Plus. So you got to listen to this particular statement from Chris Wallace. He says, quote, I am thrilled to join CNN Plus. After decades in broadcasting and cable news, I am excited to explore the world of streaming. I look forward to the new freedom and flexibility streaming affords in interviewing new ways to tell stories, Wallace said, according to a statement. The new weekday show will feature interviews with newsmakers across politics, business, sports, and culture, CNN added. And here again is Chris Wallace. Here's what he said. Quote, as I embark on this adventure, I am honored and delighted to join Jeff Zucker and his great team. I can't wait to get started, Wallace went on to say. So Wallace can't wait to join Jeff Zucker and his team of pedophiles and his team of absolute, miscreants. I mean, this is what Chris Wallace wants. I mean, Jeff Zucker, ladies and gentlemen, is the guy in the news media who has been responsible probably more than any other individual producer of a news show or of a news network of making America not trust the news anymore. He is the guy. I mean, if there ever were somebody, it was Jeff Zucker. And then you got Chris Wallace saying, well, I can't wait to join Jeff Zucker and his great team. Does that include the guy that was just arrested at CNN for luring 14-year-old and 15-year-old girls to his apartment so that he could have sex with them? Does that include Chris Cuomo, who lied repeatedly about just about any story that there was, and who was instructed to do these things? Who was instructed to report in the manner in which CNN reports? Who was in charge of the direction of it? It was Jeff Zucker. And so Chris Wallace is going there, and I know you're probably saying, well, good riddance, that's great. Well, just to prove our point, we have a few clips from Chris Wallace, but first, MSNBC reports on the Chris Wallace departure. It's really kind of hysterical. Here's Michael Steele, the former lieutenant governor of Maryland and talking head at MSNBC and also NBC, but mostly MSNBC. Here's Michael Steele talking about the Chris Wallace departure. You're going to love it. Listen to this. Here it is.
We watched our good friend Brian Williams step down this week after announcing over a month ago that this was his plan and so forth. And that's typically how that's done. So if you want to compare and contrast how one leaves a network that you've been associated with for 18 plus years, you got a sense of how you do it with when Brian left. This just came. I mean, we woke up this morning, it's like, excuse me, what? And so it speaks to a lot about people with credibility inside the Republican Party and inside journalism, having to deal with this sort of Trump faction going, I'm done.
So that's Michael Steele. Okay. Michael Steele, who is the former lieutenant governor of Maryland, a Republican, by the way, which of course he's anything but that, getting paid a lot of money to say whatever MSNBC tells him to say, which is that Chris Wallace left because, Chris Wallace wasn't welcome at Fox News, so therefore he's going to CNN Plus, and that, Chris Wallace and Fox News, Fox News is all about Trump, and it's the Trump News network. Meanwhile, at CNN, Michael Steele is saying, yeah, but Brian Williams, that's an elegant person. That's an elegant person that knows how to leave the right way. Well, folks, Brian Williams of NBC News, do you realize that Brian Williams of MSNBC, Brian Williams apparently also left as well. Do you not recall in 2015, his credibility just went out the door because he said that he had a role in a helicopter episode in Iraq, and he had been suspended for 6 months so that the network could look into it. And as it turned out, he completely lied. Here's a guy that's supposed to be in charge of, Brian Williams, that is, telling you the news, just telling you the way it is. Except that he completely and utterly made up a story about himself like he was some sort of war hero as he goes into Iraq as a reporter, and then his helicopter is shot at. I'm not sure if you remember that, but Brian Williams just left the network. He's retiring, I guess. Who knows? Maybe he's going to CNN Plus as well. I'm not really sure what he's doing. But you got Michael Steele saying, yeah, in Fox News, they don't know how to talk about the truth. This is MSNBC saying this. MSNBC. And yet these folks are circling around CNN, the network that is full of perverts and pedophiles. And of course, that's what the plus will stand for in CNN. And CNN, of course, has been also spun off by AT&T. At least they're attempting to do that. Hasn't been fully approved. And it'll be joined with Discovery Networks, which is the Discovery Channel, which is really hysterical, right? Discovery is supposed to be about nonfiction. So I guess the Discovery Channel, which tells you about the world and geography and interesting stories about the planet and so forth, I guess they needed a fiction side of Discovery. So that's CNN Plus. So here's Chris Wallace in his last hurrah at Fox News. Who does he interview? The mayor of New York City, the current mayor, Bill de Blasio. Bill de Blasio, of course, is a lame duck in New York City, but he still gets to serve out, I believe, the rest of this year, sadly. Not before he finally puts, as many dents in the city as he can before he leaves. And by the way, he wants to run for governor of New York City. Mayor de Blasio does. So yeah, I thought he was running for president, but who knows? Anyway, here's Chris Wallace in his last big interview on the Fox News channel with Fox News Sunday. And we have several clips on this, and you can see how hard-hitting Chris Wallace is. We have the first of 3 clips. Here it is.
Let's turn to COVID. You just imposed a new mandate that all private businesses must have all of their employees vaccinated by December 27th. No exception for, well, if you're not vaccinated, you can get tested regularly instead. Why impose what may well be the most dramatic and sweeping COVID vaccine mandate in the country just 4 days before you're going to leave office, sir?
Because my job is to protect New Yorkers. And look, the bottom line is we've gone through the worst crisis in our history. We've lost tens of thousands of people in this city. It's been incredibly painful. I've talked to a lot of New Yorkers who lost a grandparent, a parent, someone they loved, and I have to keep them safe.
So that's the first of 3 clips with Chris Wallace and Mayor Bill de Blasio of New York City, where de Blasio says, well, we've lost many people in New York City. That is true. If you're Chris Wallace, why wouldn't you stop him right there and say, well, sir, Mr. Mayor, isn't one of the reasons you lost so many people in New York City because you allowed and did not speak up against the really stupid policy of New York State and probably of your administration as well as mayor to put COVID positive patients in nursing homes? Chris Wallace still hasn't asked that question of the mayor. He just lets the mayor say, and the mayor chokes up, of course, which is completely phony when you see him do it. He's like, well, we lost so many people. Well, of course, it's awful that you've lost all those people. It's your responsibility. You've lost a lot of those people because of the way you've governed. And then he says, and then what about the loss of jobs from the mandates? Chris Wallace could have asked that question too. What about all of the people that are unemployed in the city of New York because of the absurd mandates that you've put into place? What about those people? What about the people that are just dead in nursing homes because you didn't speak up and you didn't do the right thing? Well, listen to more of this hard-hitting reporting from Chris Wallace and Mayor de Blasio of New York City. We have the second clip. And here it is.
Excuse me, sir. Why not allow the new mayor, who's going to come in 4 days later, to impose that mandate if he's going to do it? You're sticking him with it.
No, every time we've put a mandate in place, Chris, it has worked. We're at 71% right now of all New Yorkers, 71% fully vaccinated. We're leading the country. And that's because we used incentives and mandates. And every single mandate we put in place has greatly increased the number of people vaccinated. Since the first mandates back in August, we've had over 1 million more doses. And that's why the city is open and thriving. Chris, really, vaccination equals freedom because it allows people to get back to work, get back to their lives, be safe wherever they are, a school, a workplace. It works, and that's why we're continuing to deepen it.
So that's Bill de Blasio talking about, first of all, vaccine mandates, because his parting gift to New York City, Bill de Blasio's parting gift to New York City before he leaves as mayor, is all individuals must be vaccinated, including those in small businesses. And it's absurd, of course. It's an absurd mandate. And folks, this underscores one of the principal reasons that I do Mark and the Millennials, namely that there is a political party in the United States that believes they get to sign edicts, that they're kings. There's a mandate, and the mandate has to do with your health. And I get to tell you what kind of medicine that you have to take and how much of it. And this is an edict. This is my edict. You better do it or else. So you have loss of jobs from the mandates. And now you have Bill de Blasio doubling down and saying, well, the thing is we're one of the most vaccinated cities in the country. And the way that you get back to your life as normal is by getting this vaccine. It's like, who do you think you are? I get to go back to my life as normal, not because of government. I get to go back to my life as normal because I get to choose how I live my life and what medicine I put in my body and when. And this doesn't even matter what you think about this particular vaccine or not, because we're not even going to go in that direction. We're just talking about freedom, simple freedom issues. But you see, when you were on the left, when you were on the progressive Marxist left, like Mayor de Blasio, you don't care. In your mind, your job is not to govern, right? Your job is not to expand freedom. Your job is to issue edicts and to act like a king. And that's exactly what we've had in New York City since the beginning of COVID, but also since the beginning of de Blasio. And by the way, podcast listeners, we're not even playing the part of this interview with Chris Wallace, where Chris Wallace asks de Blasio about the crime wave in New York City. And de Blasio has the gall to say, well, it's actually decreasing. It's decreasing. Crime is decreasing in New York City. And Chris Wallace just doesn't even try to come back with statistics and facts and or quotes from people from the city. He doesn't. He just lets it go. Just really lets it go. So here's the final clip in this hard-hitting interview with Chris Wallace and the mayor of New York City, de Blasio. We have that clip, and here it is.
Well, let's talk about your focus going forward. There is some talk, and you are apparently openly considering running for governor next year. I want to take a look at this recent poll. Let's put up the numbers. Governor Kathy Hochul, who replaced Andrew Cuomo, now has 36% support. You're way back in the field at 6%. And when voters statewide were asked about you, 28% had a favorable opinion, 55% unfavorable. Mayor, do you really have a shot?
Chris, that poll you showed, that horse race, that reminds me of pretty much every election I've ever been in. I've been an underdog many, many times. It's not where you start, it's where you finish.
So remember, podcast listeners, Bill de Blasio was running for president of the United States in the last cycle. If you remember, he was running in 2020 to become the president of the United States, and he, of course, lost the Democrat primary. However, now that he's leaving as mayor of New York City and has left behind an absolute mess for the incoming mayor, Bill de Blasio now wants to govern New York State. So he's not running for president now. He wants to go and become governor and do for the entire state of New York what he did for the city of New York. So for New York State, he wants to turn it into New York City, which is an absolute mess. And podcast listeners, by mess, I'm talking about the homelessness, the drug addiction, the vagrants on the street, the smash and grabs, the overall crime rate, and the fact that the police are not able to do their jobs and enforce things. And enforce the law, that is. And that's kind of important stuff. I mean, it's really important stuff because of the fact that one of the basic things that you expect government to do what? Is to keep you safe. So Chris Wallace, naturally, doesn't go back and try to talk about the history of de Blasio's mayorship in that long interview. It was a very long interview. It must have been at least like 8 to 10 minutes. So he had plenty of time to do it, but he didn't. And so now Chris Wallace is leaving Fox News and he's going to be joining CNN Plus as if no one ever knew where Chris Wallace's heart was to begin with, because he was hard-hitting when he brought Republicans in, which, by the way, he should have been, but he should also have been hard-hitting when he brought Democrats in, which he never did. And I'm sure he's going to continue to do that. And from all news reports that I've read, he wasn't forced out of Fox News at all. That's what MSNBC is trying to infer. He wasn't forced out. He decided to go to CNN Plus because it's a new streaming service, and I'm sure they're offering him a lot of money. And he's really much more in sync with Jeff Zucker. Clearly, that's the case. So next up, podcast listeners, planting decoy packages in California. That's right. In San Francisco, the police department is planning decoy packages to deter porch pirates. I actually think this is kind of a funny thing and opens up an opportunity for all of us to do the same. The Sunnyvale Police Department said it planted several decoy packages on doorsteps throughout the city to help deter would-be package thieves. Porch pirates beware. You never know what's inside that package that you're trying to steal, the department wrote in a Facebook post. It's like, why even tell them? Why would you warn them? I mean, it's so stupid. Steal a package and you may end up with more than what you wanted, the post said. Captain Hank Sue told the San Francisco Chronicle, that is, that the department would not disclose what is in the packages, but we're making it as realistic as possible so that those thieves would not know that it was a decoy package. Sue said the police department received permission from homeowners to place several packages on doorsteps. He declined to say how many were placed across the city. The decoy packages are one way the department is trying to prevent package thefts during the holiday season. A team of officers who are part of what the department calls the Holiday Burglary Suppression Detail are out in the community to try to prevent burglaries and thieves and things like that during this time. The police department also urged residents to have their packages delivered while they're home to avoid, like, you can actually guarantee. I mean, when you order something online in this on-demand economy, all of the delivery companies, UPS, FedEx, the mail company, the USPS, and all of the smaller delivery companies, Amazon, obviously, which is not a small delivery company. It's a big delivery company, to be clear. But there are a lot of small companies that those companies will sometimes subcontract to, especially during the holidays. They don't deliver to you when you want to. They deliver to you when they're available to deliver it to you. So if you order something today and they're like, oh, you'll have it in 2 days. Well, they're not going to tell you exactly when you're going to have it. They will tell you once it's delivered, though, oftentimes, which is helpful. Okay, it's very helpful. But if you're not home, then it's not helpful because you're probably at work, or you might be shopping, or, you might be, doing food shopping. Who knows? But the bottom line is that these porch pirates don't care. They're not the least bit afraid. They don't care about, by the way, Ring doorbells either, because they're there for such a short amount of time. All they need to do is just look down the entire time and not at the Ring doorbell. You're not going to ever see their face. You'll see their hair, or you'll see their back, or what have you. So this is a problem. And apparently porch piracy is a huge problem during the month of December, because that's when everybody is buying Christmas gifts and they're being shipped to their houses. So some police departments have put GPS tracking devices inside the decoy packages that they can place in hopes of finding and arresting the thieves. The packages typically look like any other package a person might receive on the doorstep. Some homeowners have placed decoy packages outside of their doorsteps. So the homeowners themselves, in some cases, have put decoy packages in front of their doorsteps with things like dog feces and a glitter bomb. So what is a glitter bomb, podcast listeners? Well, a glitter bomb apparently is this very well-engineered package that, once stolen and brought back to the residence of the thief, explodes with glitter and throws glitter all over their house and all over the person that stole it. There are also phones inside this package, and the phones are tightly secured so that they can record the individual no matter what part of the package the individual is looking at as they're trying to open it. And then they also have, I'm not sure if you remember this in high school. I certainly do. Remember that stuff you could buy? It was in a small bottle, and you could either spray it or you could just put a few drops on the floor, and it would completely make the entire room smell like dog feces. Remember that stuff? I've forgotten what it's called. It's like a bomb, but it's not a smoke bomb. There's no smoke. It just lets off this horrible odor. And all you need is a tiny little drop. Well, apparently The glitter bomb has been put together by this guy named Mark Rober. And in addition to exploding with glitter, it also sprays out that really smelly stuff. And so he's an engineer, so he's engineered this package. In any event, we have a clip from this, and I just think this is funny. It's very seasonal humor. And here it is.
This guy stole my package and he's about to open it in his house.
Hello.
But what he doesn't know is that this is a new and improved custom-built bait package that is recording him on 4 different cameras that just released a pound of the world's finest glitter along with some other nasty surprises.
What the fuck?
But to understand how we got to this point, we need to go back 1.5 years. Because that's when someone stole a package from my porch, and the police wouldn't do anything about it even with the video footage, which made me sad. And so, drawing inspiration from one of my childhood heroes, I decided to make a bait package to lure would-be thieves, and the internet seemed to like it.
And by the way, his childhood hero is Macaulay Culkin. This guy's a NASA engineer, by the way, that you just heard talking. So he brought Macaulay Culkin in, and one of the things that the package does as well is after it blows up with glitter and smells this and sends out this horrible fart smell, it also sends out the words, "Keep the change, you filthy animal," from Home Alone. "Keep the change, you filthy animal." Pretty funny. And it's just to show you how bad this crime is in Oakland, because it is in the Oakland area, Oakland, California, the greater San Francisco area, where these Porch Pirates are very active. They're active everywhere, but particularly there, and where they have these decoy packages. Just this week, an NBC crew was robbed in Oakland, California. Think about this. This is the news crew. So, an NBC sports crew working on assignment in Oakland, California, was robbed at gunpoint Saturday morning, according to a report from the Mercury News, and the robbers got away with a camera from the crew's vehicle. No one was injured during the robbery, the newspaper noted, citing an Oakland Police Department spokesman. This robbery is reportedly the third involving news organizations in Oakland within 2.5 weeks' time. On December 3rd, a San Francisco Chronicle photographer was held up in an armed robbery. And before that, a security guard for a local news station, KRON-TV, was shot and killed during an attempted robbery, according to the Mercury News. Oakland Mayor Libby Schaaf, she's a Democrat, surprise, said 2 weeks ago that her office was drafting a proposal to place before the city council to increase active police presence and require a larger police force. Of course, this is the same town that wanted to cancel the police. Quote, "We in Oakland believe in a comprehensive and effective approach to ending gun violence." Yeah. We're not talking about gun violence. We're talking about theft and murder by the bad people. If you just put them away in prison, we don't have to worry about it. But nonetheless, we have this decoy glitter bomb packages designed by Mark Rober, and you heard that clip. It's pretty cool. Also, I think it's interesting too. This reminded me of the novel, the Tom Clancy novel. Reminded me of the Tom Clancy novel, Without Remorse. I'm not sure if you've ever read this novel. I'm a big Tom Clancy fan for a variety of reasons. But the novel Without Remorse, as it progresses, there's a whole section in the novel where the main character, the protagonist in the novel, ends up going into a major American city where the crime is rampant and decides to become a vigilante and take out all the drug lords and who are, of course, murdering and creating mayhem in the city and ruining people's lives. And you think about this, right? You think about Clancy wrote this in the 90s, this novel. And you think about fast forward some almost 28 years later, and we have an America where the blue cities aren't enforcing the law, no matter what the law is. It's not just the smash and grab thefts. It's not just the porch pirates. It's people just brazenly murdering people on the street, not necessarily for a reason, of course, not because a drug deal went bad. They just feel like they can because they're not going to actually ever be caught or sent away. And when you think about this, Clancy was way ahead of his time because he wrote this novel without remorse. That has to do with not just international intrigue, but ultimately a period of time in the novel when the protagonist goes into a major American city, I believe it was Baltimore City, and goes into the most crime-infested part of the city and literally systematically takes out the bad guys. The bad guys being the drug dealers and the murderers. And you think to yourself, at some point in America, I certainly am not a fan of vigilantism. I'm not saying so, but at some point, if these mayors of these blue cities don't get it, if they don't actually correct the problem, you're going to see more and more people taking on the Porch Pirates, right? You get a package stolen today. And then let's say next week, the Porch Pirate comes back. And the reason you don't catch them is because you're not there. And you get another package stolen. And then the third week comes back. And then you open the door because you wait for the person. And you literally try to set them up. Not that you're setting them up because they're the ones coming on your property and violating it. So they are violating your property. They come on your property. And for the sole purpose of stealing, a package, and your thought process is, well, how long is it going to take before they just break in? Because they figure if I'm having all this stuff delivered, there must be even better stuff on the inside, and then I have a home invasion. And so you wait for them, you open the door, and then you shoot them. Now, am I advocating, in this particular case, vigilantism? No, they're on your property. They're on your property, and you really don't know to what extent, if they are just thieves, or are they more dangerous than that? You don't know. But this is where America is heading. That's my point with this conversation. America is heading to a point where more and more people are going to exercise their Second Amendment right. And they're going to exercise it not just by owning arms, but bearing arms and using those arms to protect themselves, their family, and their property, because they just feel like the country is just out of control and they don't really feel as though they have any other choice but to do that. And that's where we're heading, which is why you hear mayors like de Blasio and the mayor of Lori Lightfoot of Chicago and the mayor of Oakland, California. It's why you hear those mayors trying to do away with the Second Amendment. They're saying, oh, the problem with the streets is that there are too many guns. And they're probably right that there are too many illegal guns that are owned illegally by the criminals. But that's not their solution. Their solution isn't to eliminate the illegal guns and block those individuals away. Their solution is to do what? To just get rid of guns altogether, because then that will solve, in their minds, the problem. And the more they do that, the more they talk about taking away people's Second Amendment right, the more you're going to see Americans taking the law into their own hands. I'm not suggesting, podcast listeners, that that is the way to go, but at some point in these places where you have rampant crime, you're going to see more people potentially picking up the Tom Clancy novel without remorse and go, you know what? There might be something to that. I mean, here's a protagonist, and why does anyone have to actually know who's taking out the bad guys? Why don't I just do it? Because clearly government is failing us in these blue cities. They are failing us because innocent people are being victimized every single day. Every single day. And so I can only hope that at some point, these mayors of these blue cities will wake up, will finally wake up, and will finally do what has to be done. And by the way, in Minneapolis, St. Paul, podcast listeners, they've ended the defunding the police period of time when they all lost their minds. And now they've decided to increase police spending. They've decided to increase, but not before, of course, you have a record amount of murders and a record amount of thefts and break-ins and so forth. And so my point here is when government doesn't provide its very basic function, which is public safety, then you have no choice. but to take up that responsibility for yourself and for your family and for your property. That's just the way it is. It's just common sense. It's why the Second Amendment is there. It's one of the reasons why the Second Amendment, it's not the only reason, but it's one of the principal reasons. And I never thought I would see it in my lifetime, but yes, we are seeing it on a daily basis. And with the Porch Pirates, I just think it's funny. You know, if you're having this issue now, I'm not suggesting that you shoot these people, but I am suggesting that maybe it would be funny to put some sort of gag out there that would really make them think again by the time they took it home and the package ended up exploding with some sort of, you know, rank bomb, you know, that just smelled awful, or something that really made them pay the price, not injuring them, but really make them pay the price. And obviously putting some sort of GPS device in there so you can track them down and arrest them. Although in the blue cities, they'll be removed and temporarily, maybe 2 hours, and then they'll be let out right away. So there is that problem. So next up, podcast listeners, Disney pulls an episode of The Simpsons because it talks about China. So kind of interesting stuff here. So a GOP representative, there's several of them actually, they rip Walt Disney Company over a deplorable scrubbing of The Simpsons China episode. Now, one of the nice things about The Simpsons, podcast listeners, is they use fictitious cartoon characters to make fun of everything. And that's what makes it funny, because there are no limits. What I find not so funny is apparently The Simpsons have become politically correct because of the parent company, which is Walt Disney Company, which is saying, no, you can't do that. So a group of Republican lawmakers have demanded that Disney, and this is the New York Post, a group of Republican lawmakers have demanded that Disney's CEO explain why an episode of The Simpsons that includes a joke about the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre was removed from the Hong Kong version of the Disney Plus streaming service. Quote, "We are deeply concerned by the apparent decision of Disney to scrub history on behalf of the communist tyrants in Beijing, even in a satirical environment like The Simpsons," read the letter on last Friday, led by Representative Jeff Duncan, a Republican from South Carolina, to Disney Chief Executive Bob Chapek. This deplorable action raises questions of yet another American company undermining American principles at the apparent demand of the CCP, the letter added. While all 32 completed seasons of the animated Fox sitcom are available on Disney Plus, users in Hong Kong noticed late last month that the 12th episode of the 16th season was unavailable. In that episode, the Simpson family visits China and stops at Tiananmen Square, where they are greeted by a plaque that reads, quote, "On this site in 1989, nothing happened." A jab at Beijing's campaign to downplay its brutal repression of pro-democracy protests. Congressman Duncan's letter asked whether Disney had allowed Chinese officials to review any content prior to the launch of Disney Plus in Hong Kong last month. Quote, "If yes, please identify when you provided the CCP the ability to scrub your content or to make censorship decisions," read the letter. "If no, did Disney self-censor this episode? Why?" The letter also asks if the Chinese government threatened to shut down or slow down of operations at Shanghai Disneyland if the episode was not pulled from the streaming service, and asks whether Disney Plus subscribers in Taiwan would similarly be prevented from seeing the episode. The lawmakers also asked if the Chinese government had ever asked Disney to censor content and demanded the company make its stance on the tragic events of 1989 clear. Do you publicly acknowledge that the Tiananmen Square massacre did occur and there was significant loss of life at the hands of the CCP? The letter asks. What commitments are you willing to make to fight Chinese censorship when it comes to covering up past atrocities at the hands of the Chinese government? The letter was signed by a bunch of Republicans, but this really rises to the Obama and Biden administrations, Obama first and now Biden. And of course, Obama's still in charge, namely that there is moral relativism, right? It's okay to them, with them, that you have this country run by a communist party, the CCP, that doesn't believe in human rights, that doesn't believe in individualism, and that believes that it's okay to murder people at the expense of the greater good, which is really what they believe. It's exactly what they believe. And this, to me, is no different. This canceling of history is no different than in New York City when the city council canceled Thomas Jefferson, where the New York City City Council said, you know what, that statue that has been there for 189 years has to be removed because it's offensive. The guy who implemented the policies of the Enlightenment, the philosophy of the Enlightenment, and put it into government, he's the bad guy. So it has to be removed, must be canceled. So how is then, podcast listeners, the left any different from the CCP? That's what I ask. It's not any different. The left, as it has evolved, especially over the last 30 years in America, is exactly like the CCP. Words you can't say, an English language that it's increasingly has no meaning because they continuously tell you that the word is no longer being used in that way. Equality of opportunity replaced with equity. Getting rid of every statue permanently. In some cases, just trying to melt them down because history must be erased. Exactly like the CCP with Disney. And when you have American companies that decide to bend over to the CCP, it's very dangerous because if they're willing to do it to the CCP, they are willing to do it to you. And that is really the teaching moment here. And of course, China warns the United States will pay for Olympics diplomatic boycott. So the White House has said it would not send any government officials to the Beijing Winter Games due to ongoing genocide and crimes against humanity in Xinjiang and other human rights abuses. China has told the United States it will pay for its diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Winter Olympics on human rights grounds. The White House on Monday announced it would not send any government officials to the Games in February 2022 due to ongoing genocide and crimes against humanity in Xinjiang and other human rights abuses. This prompted a stern response from Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Linjian, who told a press conference Tuesday, the U.S. will pay for its wrongdoing. You can wait and see. I mean, can you imagine? This is a country that we have exported millions of American jobs to, and tens of thousands of American businesses to, impoverishing our country because of it. And here they are, now that they are easily as powerful as us, and they're certainly not afraid of us because they're willing to do just about anything, because that's what communist countries do. They don't fear anything. Why should they? Their biggest fear is that they might be held accountable to the voters, so therefore they're willing to do just about anything before being deposed. And here they are, the CCP saying the U.S. will pay for its wrongdoing. You can wait and see. Can you imagine? Can you imagine saying that to any American president throughout the 20th century, let alone the 21st century? But the Obamas and the Bidens and the Clintons, they all just took it. You know, they think this is okay. Zhao, who accused the U.S. of hypocrisy and called Western allegations of a cultural genocide of Uyghur Muslims a fabricated lie. Although we are having our own cultural genocide here in the U.S. by the left, but they're Marxists, just like the CCP. The U.S. side attempts to disrupt the Beijing Winter Olympics, he said. The U.S. will not get away with it. According to human rights groups and first-hand accounts, China has held 1 million Uyghurs and other minorities in internment camps, where some are subjected to forced labor, sterilization, and torture. And by the way, what they're missing here is many are having their organs harvested while alive, because these are people that the Chinese don't see as human. And they're in re-education camps, which is exactly the same kind of camps the Democrats want to put the Republicans into. They must be put in re-education camps. They are dangerous. In any event, this segment started out talking about Disney pulling their episode of The Simpsons because China told them, obviously, to pull that episode because it made fun of Tiananmen Square and made fun of the CCP. And here we are in the U.S., and we're experiencing many of those same Marxist policies coming from the left. And then at the same time, we see China threatening us because we don't want to send any of our elected officials or diplomats to the Olympics because of the fact that they're engaging in re-education camps, genocide, organ harvesting, slavery. I mean, where is the American left on the slavery part, by the way? Where is BLM on the slavery part, by the way? Oh, they're nowhere. They're nowhere to be found. So next up, podcast listeners, we have the dumbest bill in America. And do we have a lead up, Mr. Producer? Here it is. And it's the dumbest bill in America, and it is illegals can drive without a license. In Massachusetts, illegals can drive without a license. In Massachusetts, Representative Tricia Farley-Bouvier, I love it, Tricia Farley-Bouvier, because I think Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, wasn't her maiden name Bouvier? Wasn't it Bouvier Kennedy? So maybe Tricia Farley-Bouvier is related. Maybe. Wouldn't be surprised. She's a Democrat from Pittsfield, Massachusetts. She's the lead sponsor of a bill, number 448, which says, among other things, that illegals can not only get a license, but if they're stopped, they can't be arrested for driving without a license, because if they're arrested, then, ICE might pick them up and deport them. So we can't do that. We just can't do that at all. So she actually has a bill that says that they can get a license. So she held a rally. By the way, she's had this bill in for a couple of years, but now it's becoming law, I believe. Or it's very close to becoming law. And she puts the bill in every year. And now, of course, she's going to get her way. And she's had rallies over the years of this bill, number 448, which looks like it's advancing. And the rallies include, of course, the Hispanic community, because in Massachusetts, particularly in Cambridge, but the greater Massachusetts area, there are over 200,000 that we know of, illegal immigrants. And she thinks it's better to give them a license because that's what's fair. So she held a rally, and we have a short clip on that, and here it is.
And so we need our kids to go to school. We need to take our kids to the doctor's appointments. We just need to live our lives and live it without fear. And it's not okay that people are afraid to do such a simple thing as drive.
So this is the typical left, right? It's not so awful that people should be able to do something as simple as drive. Yeah, driving in America, if you're here legally, is still a privilege. And that's what I was always taught when I took my driving course. By the way, driving is not a right. Driving is a privilege. And what she's saying is, oh no, driving is a right, especially if you're illegally present. And moreover, when you're stopped and you're an illegal here in the United States and you don't have a driver's license, well, you can't be arrested because it's a right to be here illegally. Here's the emergency preamble of her bill. Whereas the deferred operation of this act would tend to defeat its purpose, which is to assure that Massachusetts residents be able to travel safely during the declaration of emergency-related COVID-19 and thereafter. Therefore, it is hereby declared to be an emergency law. It's an emergency to pass this law because it's necessary for the immediate preservation of the public convenience. So if you ever thought, podcast listeners, or suspected that Democrats use emergencies or used and have continued to use COVID-19 as an emergency excuse to pass absurd laws, when here's more proof of it, right? It's an emergency, so therefore we're going to do things. We're going to issue edicts and pass these laws because these individuals have every right to do all of the same things that you do because your American citizenship isn't special. It doesn't matter anymore. And so here it is in Mass Live magazine. Lawmakers renew push to expand driver's licenses to undocumented immigrants. I love it. Undocumented immigrants in Massachusetts. State legislators renewed their push to expand driver's licenses to immigrants without status, refiling a bill last week. The bill, HD 448 SD 273, would allow residents, regardless of immigration status, to apply for a state driver's license and stipulate what documents someone would need to provide while applying for a license. Yeah. In other words, they don't have any documents, but they can show up and apply for a license. 16 states currently have similar laws on the books. Oh, and that makes it all the better, right? Well, 16 states are doing it, so we got to do it too. Representative Christine Barber, a Somerville Democrat who refiled the bill, said people need access to driver's licenses more during the pandemic as they work essential jobs that cannot be done remotely, particularly immigrants in Massachusetts cities that have seen higher COVID-19 rates. Well, maybe that's because they're crossing the border and we're not testing them when they're crossing the border. I mean, and we're not even stopping them, let alone testing them. Quote, we know right now, without the ability to drive safely, people are limited to public transportation, Barber said. Having a car is not a right in the United States. That's why we have public transportation. Because driving a car isn't a right, it's a privilege. And owning a car isn't a right, it's a privilege. You get to actually pay for it. But not with her. She's like, it's terrible. You have to use public transportation. Barbara said, we've seen some video and some pictures of some really crowded buses because they're running at reduced schedules because of the pandemic. And they could not put workers, and they are actually putting workers at greater risk of the virus, she said. But the workers she's talking about aren't you and I. It's not your grandparents who are on a fixed income. Oh no, it's the illegals who are present that she's really worried about. Quote, since COVID, it really has increased the urgency of this bill. It's an emergency where there is really about keeping workers and our neighbors safe, she added. I'm hopeful that we can pass this soon. Barber filed the bill last week with Representative Tricia Farley Bouvier of Pittsfield, Senator Brendan Creighton of Lynn, and Senator Adam Gomez of Springfield, all Democrats. They plan to announce the bill's filing at a news conference. And this was, of course, months ago. And I think now the bill is finally coming into law. It's taken all this time. And of course, this is all coordinated because President Biden is pushing for a path to citizenship, which is the reason why we have an open border. And it's the reason why cities like New York, as we've said before, have legalized illegals to vote in New York City. That's what it's all about, podcast listeners. It's not about keeping illegal immigrants safe. If it were, they would be tested and treated at the border and returned home. But they're not. It's about letting as many in as possible and changing America forever. By the way, changing America's politics forever. Nice try out there, because I'm sure the left is going to go, oh my gosh, it's because you don't want those people who are Hispanic. Nope, that's not what I'm talking about. Because the reason you want all of these illegals here is because you are trying to change America's politics. And you are trying to undermine the individuals who have built this country and the individuals who've gotten here legally and who respect our laws. And you keep changing the goalposts. And when you keep changing the goalposts about laws and about what does matter to the people here in this country, at some point, you know what you're going to do? You're going to foster unrest. You're going to foster unrest because people are going to be like, well, wait a minute. The laws apparently don't matter because you keep changing them like every single year that you go in there. And this is why we do, podcast listeners, the dumbest bill in America, because it demonstrates to you that we have too many laws. We're not even enforcing the laws that we have. And then you have Democrats who don't believe that laws should really matter, that laws should be principled, that American citizenship doesn't matter, that we are a sovereign nation. They don't care about that. This is all about political power. You know it and I know it. And that is the dumbest bill in America. Illegals can drive without a license in Massachusetts. And that's it for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.